Hi, everyone. We're live, but some people might be watching this on replay. So, hello to you too. Thank you for joining us on another Workplaces That Work conversation. I started this space a few years ago as a way to bring in experts across different niches on key topics that are very important to the workplace. I work as an employee resource group consultant and a workforce strategist. I partner with a lot of HR leaders, talent leaders, um, L&D leaders around what do we need for our workplace and what kind of pathway are we creating between these groups and the business goals. So a lot of conversations that I bring, a lot of experts that I bring here in our conversation, I will tie back in some way to ERGs, BRGs, but it really is about workplace culture and workplaces that work, right? We use a lot of words. Uh, the goal is to have an organization, a workplace where people are seen as human and they can do their best work. And so today I have a guest. Yosi has a great story around transition, and I'll make sure he shares that with you. But I want to talk. We want to talk about something that starts from the transition from being an expert to a leader. And as somebody that comes from the biotech scientist space, and Yossi is from the tech space, we both kind of like understand that system where people are promoted based on expertise, and then we forget about the leading people and managing place. So I think that transition from expert to leading others is very, very common, but is also the least supported. So there's a lot of opportunities there, and we'll have Yosi Kossowsky introduce himself right now, Yosi, and then a little bit about your own background before we dive into some of the questions and solutions that you provide for your clients, but also that you would recommend for people listening.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Lola. Thank you for having me on the show. So my background, I started off my career really in the technology space, in IT. I did that for about 10 years and then did a little dip into pre-technical sales role and then moved into a systems engineering role. And I'm a geek at heart. I love technology. It makes sense to me. It works. There's a lot of instant gratification, and the whole idea of a SME, a subject matter expert, really is was the place to be. And you differentiate yourself based on your knowledge and your ability to be the person who can get the technology to work, who can solve the problem the quickest. And I loved that. But then I wanted to, move up in my career and take on some more people responsibilities. And what I started getting feedback pretty quickly was not so great on the people side. And my ability to communicate clearly, and therefore my ability to influence, my ability to bring other people along, to build trust, forget leadership and that, which we'll talk about in a second, but just those interactions weren't working. And where technology came so naturally to me, I could kind of just sit down and figure it out. And again, you get pretty instant gratification. Either it works or it doesn't work pretty quickly. People were bizarre. There was no gratification. I could never really figure out where were people at, what were people really feeling, what was really going on behind the face. And so I've in my life, as I look back, there was many times where like an angel came and gave me a direction. And so this was one of those times where I was just talking to somebody about my challenge, and they're like, I think you should take this workshop on emotional wellness therapy. And I'm like, okay, it sounded a little bit woo-woo, but I was out of my, here I am an expert, and here I'm in a space where I can't figure out the expertise. I can't figure out how to get it right. And so what started off as a 3-day kind of like intensive workshop became my life's focus outside of work for the next 5 years as I really learned more about myself and how to recognize my emotions, how to give them names and understand the nuances of them, what was triggering me, what was beneath the triggers, how to manage my emotions, how to get back to a place of equilibrium, how not to necessarily act. So if I feel frustrated or annoyed, that doesn't necessarily give me permission to take it out on anybody else. But I had to learn all of these things. And I'll be honest, it was not easy for me. I was really driven by data and by logic, and there were really black and white things. There was like you should and shouldn't do things, and that was really that simple, even though I was never that consistent myself. But I didn't recognize my level of inconsistency. And as I was going through this work, that all came to the surface. And another part of this work was learning how to deal with myself and the realizations that were coming up when I realized my biases and how those played out, and my ignorance, and that essentially I also was tying my sense of self to my subject matter expertise. And when I started to actually realize how much of my identity was tied into that, it really helped me understand why I wasn't able to make this transition into leadership easily.
Yeah. So that, I mean, yeah, I think that piece of it is what people always miss, is it really starts with self-awareness, right? You can sort of help people relate well with people if you don't even acknowledge what's going on in yourself, right? We all have biases. We all have different styles and preferences and the ways we do things. So thank you for sharing that, Yosi.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right. So let's do a little bit of, I mean, you have a personal journey into what you do,
Yeah.
but let's leverage some of the insights from what you actually do every day. So do you
Okay.
want to share a little bit about your work? What do you do now?
Yeah. So after I got certified as an emotional wellness therapist, and I also got certified in behavioral neuroscience, because as a geek, I really wanted to understand the whole system and how does the brain work? How does the brain work on decision making and all of that? What became clear to me is that I did not want to be a therapist. However, I really felt, how can I have this knowledge that helped me and not use it to help other people? And so often I would see in the workplace what I would call out of sync and a friction, where people just didn't know what they didn't know, and they didn't know how to make these transitions, how to show up differently, how to deal with their frictions and their challenges. And so I went and got certified as a coach and started working with leaders. And I did that pretty much like as an extra curricular thing on after work for a couple of years.
Doing your 9 to 5.
Yeah, still doing my 9 to 5. And then, again, another kind of like gift and strange wrapping paper happened. The company got acquired. The acquisition was very bumpy from a cultural people perspective. And I took really one of the first like cognitive big risks in my life. And I went to my manager and I said, I'm going to offer coaching to the leaders. And I know that's not part of my engineering role, but I'm going to do that. And I got blessed again. He supported me on this decision. I went and I made this pitch to the executive team of the acquisition, and many of them took me up on it. And within a few months, they started this group that I was coaching came back to me and said that this was transformational. And then I started like a program after hours to help employees make this transition into the acquired company. And now that was a lot of emotional work. And so as I started actually seeing how these skills were playing out in like larger forms and more at scale, I became very excited that, there's really there's really practical elements to this work. And then another blessing happened, which is HR came to me and they said, we've heard you've been doing this work. We'd like you to do it full time. And naturally, my role changed from technical engineering to human engineering, as I joked with everybody at the time. And that was in 2014. And ever since then, I have been working in areas of leadership development at scale. For the first 6 years, from 2014 to 2020, I was in this company called Cisco, working around the world with leaders and teams, learning a lot about culture, about gender, generation, and all of the things that we do with inclusion and ERGs, on what does it mean to work together to communicate more effectively across your organization, whether you're both from the same country, or if there are those differences. And then I left Cisco at the end of 2020. Briefly, I stepped into a HR role and then got offered a chief technology officer role. And I jumped at it because, it was a C-suite role and it was back in technology. And again, it was an amazing experience. I learned so much. And on a personal level, what I recognized was it really helped give me focus on what I really found a passion for, which is this work that I do now, which is working with leaders and teams on helping them be more effective within themselves, growing that self-awareness, and learning how to then take that self-awareness and bring it into their day-to-day so that they are interacting more effectively and getting better results.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, you had the dream life, which is getting to start and find your passion while in the corporate workplace. And I think a lot of people, sometimes we overthink and separate it. I mean, I guess it depends on what their passions actually are. But I always tell people too, the opportunity to make a transition doesn't have to mean quitting your job.
No.
So much you can do where you are right now as far as transition. So I like that IT engineering to human engineering while employed by the same company.
Yeah, it was an amazing thing. And it does prove, Lola, that a lot of times the limits we see are the limits we create.
Yeah. And now that as you're sharing, I'm thinking of biochemist, biotechnology major. By the time I left corporate America, I was on the HR platform in a biotech company. And I think about that transition didn't happen because HR just woke up one day and said, we're going to put you in HR from operations. It happened because I was doing the stuff that needed to be done in my area of passion and expertise within the organization. And I remembered when my last role before I moved to HR was in supply chain. And I remembered a lot of people didn't know I was in operations because of the things that the spaces I show up. So it's interesting how, when you talk about corporate America and some of those limits we put on ourselves based on titles and hierarchy. And we were talking about this just before we came on, is also how some of these things are also so regional. And when you've worked at a global company and had experience with employees across different parts of the world, you also understand like some of these conversations are nuanced depending on what part of the world you sit in, even within the same company, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's almost like crazy how impactful our mindset is on everything that happens around us. What we see as possible for ourselves becomes what's possible for ourselves. What we see as possible for everybody else limits what we can see or do or interact with those other people.
Yeah.
And, I remember the first time I was dealing with people in India and not as an engineer and not understanding the nuances in the culture. And once I started realizing that there was a challenge and a problem, it took me a while to recognize that I had a responsibility to try and solve or be part of that solution and not just wait for everybody else to solve that problem for me.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, before we go deeper into ERGs, I'm going to, maybe do a check-in really at a high level, to sort of summarize some of the things we've touched on now.
Sure.
So that leadership transition story and insights that a lot of us have experienced, maybe making it clearer to people in leadership roles. Why do high performers often struggle when they step into leadership role? Based on your
Yeah.
studies now after that and your own experience, what do you think is the major issue?
So I use an analogy of driving a car. As the expert, you're the driver. Your hands are on the wheel, your foot's on the pedal, you're determining where you go and how you go. But a leader isn't the guy at the wheel or the woman or the person at the wheel anymore. They're either next to the driver or they're in the back of the car or they're not even in the car altogether.
Oh, like the way I
And
control my husband's driving when I'm sitting on the passenger side.
yeah, exactly like that. Exactly, right? So and that's what it feels like, right? All of a sudden, leaders tell me when they get into these roles, like, I feel like I'm not doing anything anymore. And I'm like, you're leading people. They go, but it doesn't feel like I'm working. And I'm like, that's this hard transition from being the person who's touching the things day to day, completing the work, to now what I would call orchestrating, right? If you think about an orchestra, and we've all seen the maestro, right? Conducting the orchestra, that person is not playing an instrument, but is working to get everybody to play in concert with each other, right? In harmony. And that's very different. If you're used to, I'm the person who's making the music by touching the instrument, and that's how I think of work, then if I'm not touching the instrument, what's work now? And so that mindset of my job is no longer to be the person with the hands on the wheel or the person who's making the music. Now I'm getting other people to do it. And it's either orchestrating, influencing, guiding. And you know what? What people start to realize after they start to make this transition is that it's actually more work. It's so hard to get others, to influence others, to support others in getting this work, because so many times we think I could just do this better myself.
Yep.
I could do it faster myself. I could do it right myself. And that may be true, but then we don't give other people the opportunity to grow and develop, but also we don't give ourselves the opportunity to grow and develop and to really take advantage of the role that I wanted of being a leader.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that analogy, the visual. I'm very visual, so I always love when people use examples that I can visualize. When you talk about
Right.
the orchestra and the driving, because your view is broader now. And
Right.
so maybe that's what's needed. I mean, the person that is working on one instrument or doing one thing only sees what they are doing, right?
Right.
You have a different view. And so it's part of your job is now to bring everything together, which might not be visible to the individuals who are being SMEs. So really great
Yeah.
response.
And I think that's a really powerful point, by the way, is I think it's almost definite that case, right? That when you are focused on what you are doing,
Right.
then it's not that you don't have the ability to have bigger perspective, but you're not being asked to, and it's not actually in support of you getting your work done to try to constantly have that bigger view.
Right.
But as a leader, that is the point. And it almost becomes amazing if you take advantage of it, that you're now connecting dots and seeing a different type of system that you're able to do and influence and conduct. So I love that you brought that up.
Yeah, and I think the other part of this though is we have these conversations about promotions and leadership where there are certain people that are like, I'm just okay being the SME.
Right.
I want to just do what I'm doing. But then companies promote based on certain criteria. It's like your growth path requires you now managing 100 people. Some people just want to grow in their niche. And, some of it has to do with personality. Some of it has to do with maybe this is just a 9 to 5. I have a bigger passion outside of work. I don't want more responsibility. So I think this is part of where L&D kind of blends into the organizational structure, right? Not promoting people into people management roles just because it's the next path we've decided for them.
And it's a big challenge. I think it's a big HR challenge to come to that acceptance that if I don't have a guru track, right, the ability for you to grow as a SME, an individual contributor, then I'm going to eventually lose some amazing talent because, look at this world we live in today where AI is booming and blossoming. And, for me, it's been an invitation to get back into technology in a sense. And I've been rusty and relearning it. But if we're going to really take advantage and understand how to take advantage of advances, we do need those very seasoned and experienced gurus. But we're only going to get them if we create a space for them.
Right. Absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about this from a team performance. When you talk about delegation, I guess that's the word I would bring into the conversation now. The challenge with leaders and managers and delegating to people. How does all of these conflicts show up in team performance when a leader to a manager transition has created this hiccup where there is not enough emotional intelligence to manage people?
Yeah. So for me, the emotional intelligence is, first of all, that self-awareness. Because delegation requires taking our hands off the wheel. But it also requires learning to be okay that other people are going to do it and do it differently than you did it. And so it's moving my focus from what needs to get done to what is the purpose of what we're doing? What is the big why, the big outcome we're looking for? So to use like a military analogy, if I tell my team we need to take that hill, okay, then they'll take the hill. But they might blow up the hill by taking the hill. If I tell my team we want to take that hill and build a new base on that hill, now they understand that the purpose of taking that hill isn't just to get it, but it is so that we can now do something with it. And often we fall down when we move into these leadership roles that we still keep on telling people what to do, not why they're doing it. Mm-hmm. So, we struggle with that I'm not the one doing it. Then I'm struggling with, well, I don't like how other people do it, or that's not how I would do it. And then we struggle with, well, I did tell them what to do, but they didn't do the thing that I wanted them to do. As one leader said to me, right, that he realized, he said to his employee, you did exactly what I asked you to do, but not what I needed you to do. And he realized in that moment that the failure was his, not the employees, because he did tell the employee what to do, but not why they were doing it. And so we have to learn that I got to communicate differently, which means I got to think differently. So ultimately, think differently, communicate differently, learn to process my own problems with the uncertainty that other people are going to do it, and therefore I'm not in control of the doing. Yeah. That other people are going to do it differently at a different pace. And I also need to reframe failure. Because if we remember children, if we could even remember ourselves, right? When we went from being a baby to moving and then crawling and then eventually standing, we fell a lot. We fell all the time, but we didn't view falling as failure. It was learning. Somewhere along the line, we make this transition in our brain that falling is failure. It's not, if we're willing to look at it as learning.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you. So as we start to wrap this up, we spent a lot of time talking about transition. Thank you so much for all of the examples and just being very clear about that awareness piece and also what to do. I think a lot of the things that also came up is communication.
Yeah.
And I will tell you that I work with a lot of ERGs, and one of the workshops that I do is around communication. So there's two layers to these. There's communication from top to down. So when I'm talking to the leaders, when I'm talking to the people putting this ERG programs together, there's a lot of communication, similar to the example you just shared about the leader who says, I told you, you did exactly what I told you to do, but not what I needed you to do. I love that.
Right.
Because the communication down kind of get lost in translation. And then when I'm working with ERG themselves, there's the communication up and the communication across. Actually, for my doctoral dissertation, communication ended up being my biggest focus because of just all of the impact it has on employee turnover decision, where the leaders feels like, I'm great. I told them, they know where their career path is. They know what to do, but they didn't do it. And the employees feeling like my manager just does not know how to communicate, does not share, So let's talk about communication a little bit. Because I think that's part of the how to and the awareness part of leadership and leadership transition. So talk a little bit of that about communication. Where does it break down when we talk about workplaces?
So I find that communication breaks down in two main places. One is context, right? What we're doing versus why we need to do it. When we don't provide context to people, it's a challenge. And it's a challenge because we have a human limitation. So let me ask you, Lola, do you know how to read other people's minds?
No, I wish.
Right? I have never met somebody who actually gives the answer yes. I have people who say I'm intuitive, etc., but I don't know anybody who can literally be a mind reader. And therefore, if I am not verbalizing the context and the explanation, nobody's going to be able to read my mind and figure it out on their own, no matter how obvious I think it is. So the first part is no one's a mind reader. And therefore, the more that you provide, the more context, the more information, then that's going to help. The second problem that we have is actually a neuroscience one, which is we all live with subjective perception. So Lola, do you know anybody personally who sees, understands, makes sense of the world exactly the same way that you do?
Wow, no. I wish that was the case. Like we all wish or we all imagine, even our spouses don't.
No, right? And so that influences the way we hear one another.
Mm-hmm.
And so the second challenge, in addition to the context and no mind reader, is I know when I talk to people now that there's a 100% chance, 100%, that the way what I say and what you hear is not the same. I know that for sure. But what I also know that I don't know for sure is how you did hear it, how you did interpret it. Therefore, if it's important to me as a leader to find out how somebody else heard me, understood me, interpreted me, and I'm going to turn this back to you. If you wanted to make sure how somebody heard you, understood you, interpreted you, what would you need to do to find out?
I would ask you to reframe it to me. I'll ask you
Right?
to repeat, what do you understand? Do you understand what I just said? Repeat it back to me.
And that's the only answer that I know. But then I ask leaders, how often do you do that? And they go, not that often.
Right. You just say
Right?
it and walk away.
Or we ask any questions. Does that make sense to you? And people answer yes or no, but that doesn't tell me what you heard. It just tells me if you think you heard. And that's another huge breakdown. And so communication breaks down not because of roles or where we are in the organization, but because as humans, we have subjective perception. And if I want to find out what you heard and how you heard me, I need to ask you. And that's a matter of me getting comfortable with the discomfort of asking that question.
Right. And actually listening. Because to your point, even in the corporate setting, you're talking to a leader, you're talking to an executive, and they say, does that make sense to you? How many times do people say no?
Exactly.
When you say no, even if it makes absolutely no sense, I'm going to want to sound really smart, and I'll be like, absolutely, I got it. Yeah, it makes complete sense.
And then you have a breakdown.
Yeah, because you interpret it your own way, and then you act on that.
Right.
Well, thank you so much, Yosi. I know there's so much we could unpack, even on communication itself. But I would say for anyone listening who is leading or who is aspiring to get into a people leadership role, right, who is an SME now, what's one simple change? I feel like what you just shared now is actually one simple change on the asking to listen back. But if you want to expand on that succinctly, and then also any other thing you would like to add for people that are listening on how they can, practical shifts they can make immediately when working with people.
Okay. So I would say that the most critical one is this communication piece. And I call it validating and confirming. So when I am the speaker, I need to find a way that I can validate what you heard. And I would say, Lola, I am working on my communication skills, or I am wanting to make sure I made sense. Do you mind replaying what you heard or giving me your takeaways from this conversation? So I take the responsibility on me so that I don't in any way endanger that you might feel like I don't trust that you were listening. So that's the validating piece. The other side of that is if I am the listener, to proactively say, Lola, here's my takeaways from what you said to me. Here's how I understood you. If I am willing to take the accountability and the responsibility for those two steps, my world will change. Your world will change because you will find that you close the gap of misunderstanding with each other.
Absolutely. Thank you. And as you're talking, I'm also thinking of, hey, we are in the AI age now where we're using all these AI tools and piece. Right. And how many times do we give a prompt and the result doesn't make sense? And they were like, well, I say, no, that's completely wrong. That's not what I asked for. That's not what I need. And we give more context. Even AI knows how to give you feedback. If you put like a directly dumb, unclear, you get a dumb response back. Even talking about network. If you don't specify if you're talking about IT network or human network, it's going to give you a literal response back. And so it made me very aware of how much is being lost when we are talking to people by the way we are getting responses back from, all these tools now.
Right. Yeah, it's so true. That's a really good point. Thank you.
Thank you for having this conversation with me, Yosi. Thank you. Really great. For anyone listening, if you want to follow up with Yosi on the work that he's doing with leaders, if you'd like to bring him into your organization, his link is in the comments if you're watching this on YouTube. But if you're on LinkedIn, just reach out directly. I'm sure you'll be happy to chat. Thank you for being
here. Always. Thank you, Lola.